Aloha, everyone. This is Pastor Derald Skinner of Calvary Chapel Pearl Harbor and a Chosen Generation radio broadcast. It's great to be with you today as we look forward to a special interview that we have set for all the listeners and also for those that would like to view this at our website. Special guest today is Pastor Tom Broadbent, and he's a good friend, known him for years, and he's graduated Liberty University, was ordained through our church. But probably even more importantly is his service to our country. Tom served in the Army for 28 years, retired just of May 2021, and he's ranked a CW3, and he's teaching a class. We just had a seminar here called REBOOT Recovery. It's dealing with the trauma that so many of our soldiers go through when it comes to combat. And it's a fabulous course. We had the course here just a little bit ago, and it was just tremendous. My wife and I sat through it because we want to learn more and grow in our counseling and ministering. And Tom, why don't you tell us, first of all, who you are and your family, and then we can get into your military career. And then we're going to talk about this REBOOT Recovery. And I'll just give a brief synopsis that's in the flyer that we put out for all the soldiers and the spouses that are also involved in this. REBOOT Combat Recovery is a course, not a support group, providing practical help for service members, veterans, and families dealing with the moral and spiritual wounds from combat trauma. You won't find shortcuts or easy answers, but instead you'll find solutions that last. And that's what I discovered in going through this 12-week course that we did in 4 days. It was because you're from Colorado, you're living in Colorado. So Tom, why don't you share with us about your life, your family, and then we can get into your military, as I said. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Derald, for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to teach the course. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning discussing a very important topic. To begin with, as you said, Pastor Tom Broadbent, ordained right here at Calvary Chapel Pearl Harbor back in May of 2017. I've been a Christian now for 33 years and been married for 22 years. Served 28 years of combined service between the California Army National Guard and active duty Army. During that time frame, I've moved well over 30 times. I've had multiple MOSs, which are jobs that we have in the military. Spent 12 years in combat arms. I spent 10 and a half years in CID, which is conducting felony level investigations and providing protection for 11 of the top DOD officials. And I spent 5.5 years in emergency management. And in all of that time, I got 3 combat tours. The first one was probably the worst, and that's while I was in combat arms. And the next 2 were while I was with CID, conducting felony level investigations. And through it all, I've seen a lot of really bad stuff. Lost a lot of good friends. And we've seen and done things that, quite frankly, I don't think anybody should ever have to endure. And I struggled with that for many years. As I said, been a Christian for 33 years, and so obviously I was a Christian when I deployed. And as a mature Christian, I really struggled with some of the things that went on in combat. I thought that I had all the right answers, and truly I did, but I struggled to take my faith, what I believed, and connect it to what was being lived out on the field of combat. And for many years, I just did what the military taught us to do, to compartmentalize, to put things in a box and set that box up on a shelf. And it wasn't until a decade later that many of those boxes fell off the shelf and came undone, and I was an emotional wreck. At a time in my life where I needed to be there for my family, I found that the opposite took place where my family had to really kind of console me in what I was struggling with, and all of that surrounded by guilt, by a spirit of unforgiveness, heartache. I was grieving the loss of so many people that we've lost in combat, and not just those lost in combat, but it overflowed into my personal life with those, friends and family members that I've lost that weren't even associated with the military. Those losses became triggers, and so I've really had struggled until a good friend of mine that I met through LinkedIn
Mm.
reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to help teach Reboot Combat Recovery. And at the time, I thought, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
And he says, "Oh, it's this 12-week Bible-based curriculum for veterans and spouses suffering with from combat trauma." And my initial response is it really Bible-based?" And he's like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
sure, check it out." And he emailed me the first week's lesson plan, and I looked at it, and what I saw in it really just kind of blew my mind. First off, it was in fact Bible based, but the principles taught, even in that first week, was just life changing. It was like somebody flipped a switch where the light bulb came on. And many times as I've taught the class, everybody I talk to, everybody that I've taught this material to, has reiterated the same conclusion that I came to when I read the material for the first time. And it was one of those things that uh, you know your Bible, you
Hmm.
read your scriptures, uh, you believe everything in there, but you never really connect the dots. And in that very first week, really drives home a very important point that when God created us, He created us in His image,
Hmm.
body, mind, and spirit. And just like the body and the mind can be injured and fixed by going to medical doctors, psychiatrists, medical health community, the soul too
Right.
could be injured. The soul could be wounded. And if the soul could be wounded or injured, then it too could be fixed. And yet nobody in the medical community was getting after those type of injuries until now.
Tom, now you've shared the intensity of warfare with me and with the group in your seminar. And I think you said, if I remember correctly, you had 22 close combatants, brothers in arms, who lost their lives over there as you were in Fallujah and many other places. Um, it's difficult. It's heart wrenching as you shared. I mean, uh, for myself, I listen and you just want to break down and cry because you realize the brotherhood that becomes this bond of fighting for one another and taking care of one another. You're depending on each other. Can you kind of touch upon what's that like, that bonding that you have, and how what struggles you go through as you are in the midst of warfare?
You know, when you meet somebody on the playground in school,
Yeah, yeah,
uh, you know, you never know what it is that's going to click, what it is that's going to connect you to another human being to where you become lifelong friends. And I have a few of those that I've met over the years that we've maintained a friendship uh, for decades now. The older I get, the longer that time goes.
right.
But even in that, uh, you can go into you can join the military and train with people, um, get to know each other, hang out together. But until you actually fight side by side, you're trusting them with your life. They're trusting you with their life, and even in that, until it actually happens, the connection is not there. When it happens, and you know that person just saved my life,
Mm.
there is an affection, there's a love, there's an admiration, um, there's a bond for that person that really can't be replaced. It's kind of like, when for those who get saved, it's the moment that you realized I should have been dead,
Yeah. Right.
and yet because Christ loves me, He took my place. He died for me. When that realization is real, then our only response is to love God back. Well, it's the same thing in combat. When you realize you should have been dead, the person who saved you, the team, the squad that saved you, you love them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You may argue with them from time to time. You may, poke fun at each other from time to time. You may disagree from time to time, but you love them,
Yeah.
and there's nothing that you wouldn't do for them. Some of the greatest people I know, I'm still in contact with them because we've had some really good teams um, that I would do anything for. I would go to travel the greatest distance to help them if they needed it. And when you lose them,
Mm.
it's difficult. When you think about the folks that have been there for you,
Mm.
that's been there for your family, and when they're not there anymore, it's tough. When you see it happen, it's almost unbearable. But the problem with soldiers, Marines, airmen, uh, sailors, when you're in battle, you don't always have time to grieve. You're going from one traumatic event to the next,
Mm.
to the next, to the next, and you never have time to grieve, to mourn, to reflect on what just happened. And sometimes you don't have that opportunity for years. I was stationed out of Fort Benning for a season, and we have a lot of Ranger folks that deploy out of Fort Benning, and their deployments not as long, but they're a lot more frequent, and they're going 4 to 6 months. They come back, and then they're right back out again, and they have multiple deployments, time and time and time again. They deploy, they come back, they train up, they deploy. They come back, they train up, they deploy, and they don't ever get a chance to slow down and breathe.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's like that in a lot of uh, duty stations like Fort Hood, Fort Bragg, Fort Lewis, where they're just constantly going. Even here in Hawaii, out of Schofield or some of these other installations, they don't get a chance to slow down and breathe and properly mourn or grieve, and as a result, they end up uh, with PTSD, um, depression, contemplating suicide, things like this, and they go to mental health. They try to get help, and the problem with that is that the mental health folks are trying to focus in on fixing a broken mind.
And you've discovered through Reboot, it's a broken soul.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Why don't we let me share a little portion of a letter written by the spouse of a soldier who uh, has experienced PTSD, combat trauma, and it's touching. We're not going to read the whole letter, but maybe some portions here, and you can give your feedback on this letter as you share it in your class, which is powerful. And it says here, the impact of 4 letters, a testimony. At the age of 6, my daughter learned 4 letters to explain what was happening to her daddy. Daddy has PTSD, I told her. PTSD is one tool the enemy uses as he seeks to destroy families and bring war into the home. But my husband is a survivor. I'm a survivor, and our children are survivors. Survivors of an unexpected war with unrelenting attacks from an unseen enemy, safely under the shelter and protection of the only one, that's a capital O on that one, capital One, capable of defeating the adversary's cruel and continuous barrage. We are victorious. Of course, she's speaking of Jesus. So what exactly is PTSD? People often incorrectly think it's an emotional weakness. Why can't he just move on? Without realizing that trauma can physically alter the brain. I want to momentarily quote or paraphrase from the book When War Comes Home, because the authors explain PTSD so clearly. Imagine walking across a frozen lake. To start out, you're freely enjoying yourself, running around, slipping and sliding, twirling around like a professional ice skater until you hear pop and look down to see the ice cracking right where you're standing. Your first reaction is to become totally still, to raise your arms out to maintain your balance. Your muscles are tight now, your shoulders are bunched up, your eyes are the size of softballs, and you begin to take very small, careful steps back the way you came. You can hardly breathe. But what do you do once you're beyond the cracked ice? Well, you begin running around again. No way. You'll stay on high alert until you make it safely back to solid ground, because you experience that the ice could begin cracking again at any moment. Every step you take is in a hypervigilant state because you experience a very traumatic event. Now imagine that walking on ice taking a full year or years. Imagine you encountered ice cracking repeatedly. What happens to your brain when you're finally off the ice? For those with PTSD, you find that you're now walking on a sidewalk with the same mentality you had while you were on the ice. Why? For some people, the brain gets stuck in crisis alert mode. The brain is literally altered. The part of the brain which interprets or calms emotional responses, known as the hippocampus, shrinks and works less effectively. The right and left brain hemispheres have trouble communicating with each other, and that results in being emotional and unordered or emotionless, cold, withdrawn, and not much fun to be around. As crazy as it sounds, many of us here know that shift of emotions can happen inside of 5 minutes, depending on a trigger you may encounter or just perceive to encounter. For years, my husband sought to protect me by not telling me about his frozen lake experiences. Now, Tom, that's a portion of this letter. We have more to share, but is that well describing what a combat veteran may experience after going through combat and the trauma that's involved?
Absolutely, without a doubt, and not just the combat veteran, but the family as well.
Mm.
The combat veteran, from the perspective of their whole makeup of who they are, how they respond or react to life circumstances, have completely changed. To give you an example, it's a small example, but my first combat tour was in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
Probably my worst combat tour of the 3. In years later, over a decade later, driving down the road, a small country road out in the middle of Alabama, and I saw a trash bag in the middle of the road, and just for a second, I jerked the wheel, only to realize just as fast that, wait a minute, I'm not in Iraq, I'm not in Afghanistan, it's just a trash bag. That hyper-vigilance doesn't ever go away. I have not had a decent night's sleep since 2000, since 2004.
Mm.
Every night, I get up multiple times during the night. I do a little perimeter check around the house.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the United States.
Yeah.
We're not having to deal with insurgents. But yet, there's something in me that's changed forever. That even though I know I'm safe and secure in my home, even though I know I serve an awesome God that has my six,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, I still get up in the middle of the night. I still do those perimeter checks. I check the locks. I check the windows. I look outside. I turn the lights on. I turn them off. I check my gun safe. I check the house. And just as that's always changed me, and I've always been on that ice, if you will, it's the same for our spouses, you know. But instead of being worried about IEDs or insurgents, they're worried about whether or not, their husband, their wife, their kids, whatever, uh, how are they going to respond to the veteran uh, losing their mind? How are they going to respond to where they just react? And it's tough, because in America, everybody focuses in on the veteran. There's not a lot of folks focused in on the spouses or the children. What Rebecca shared in this letter, when you read it in its entirety, she is on that ice with him
Mm.
because she doesn't know when or where that her veteran, her spouse, is going to blow up, get angry, lash out, whether he's going to attempt suicide, whether he's going to try and hurt himself. She doesn't know. Every day is a guessing game,
Mm.
and that's the real trauma that our families are facing because of the effects of combat trauma.
Now, as we look to this, we've talked initially about the wounded soul, and this combat recovery, reboot recovery class, is that which addresses that wounded soul, and it brings a new vitality, a new hope, a new understanding uh, of why bad things are happening in our world, yeah, as well as how to take it to God, of which you said, as we all know, we're made in His image, and He can heal the soul.
Right.
So as we come to the end of our program today, as we look to what's going on, we're going to talk tomorrow and get deeper into that healing of the soul and the Word of God and the power of Jesus Christ, the working of the Holy Spirit, and how Tom has found that peace and that enthusiasm for life, as well as now becoming a minister to minister his pain to those who are also in pain, and they can have hope and they can have help and they can have healing, not only for the combat soldier, but also for the family. So we'll be diving into that tomorrow. And so, of course, why don't you give the information that's regarding this reboot recovery, Tom, and how people can get in touch with it if they want to be a part of a seminar class?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking about that. Many combat veterans and first responders struggle to heal from traumatic experiences they've encountered, and tragically, far too many of them choose suicide. But if you want to help, if you want to sign up for a course, you can go to RebootRecovery.com to learn how to either deploy hope for your community by starting a trauma healing course, or you can join a course already offered in your area via live in person or via Zoom. And so that's RebootRecovery.com.
Thank you, Tom. And for all the listeners out there, we'll be picking up tomorrow. God bless.